was a murder in a small town in Texas.
We was living in a time in Wiley when we didn't even lock our doors at night. But that's the worst I ever seen. I mean, blood everywhere. There was 40-something X marks in the body.
Discovery that has haunted him, he says, for decades.
Welcome to True Crime and Wine. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn, and I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single upload. I say it like that because they're supposed to be on Wednesdays, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. But I am getting better, and that is because I have amazing people helping me stay on track. Happy 420 if you celebrate. I used to be a celebrator, and then something happened along the way where even the thought of being high gives me anxiety right now. So, I just can't. I can't join it, but I will live vicariously through all of you who can and enjoy it. Today's your day. Before I forget, you guys always ask what color lipstick this is, and I always forget what it is when I'm supposed to reply, so I got her here today, and it's called She's Not From Here from Patrick Ta, and I just obsessed with it. I also got the liner too. Definitely recommend with the liner. Just because with a bold color, you just want to make sure everything's like nice and crisp and in there. All right, we are going to get right into it today. Before we do, hold on tight for a very important message. Before we get started, I want to give a big thank you once again to our sponsor today, PDS Debt. Like I mentioned in the last partnership, I wish I had known about a service like PDS Debt when I was in a really bad financial situation. I felt like I was never, ever going to get out of it. And a lot of the response I got in the comments was you yourself had also been there at one point in your life, or you currently were in that situation. And I want to thank you for sharing that because it made me feel less alone, and I know that it made other people watching and reading the comments less alone as well. I think the large majority of people in the world have all experienced debt to some degree in their life. And it can just feel so crippling. It's something you don't want to talk about. It's something you don't want to ask help for. And it's one of those things, as it gets deeper and deeper, you just keep like shoveling that pile even more and more, just hoping it's going to go away, but it obviously doesn't. If you don't know what PDS Debt is, it's a financial service company whose main goal is to provide financial peace of mind through effective and fair debt management services, and it's customized to your individual circumstance. What they do is they roll all of your debt into one monthly 0% interest payment, not only making it manageable to deal with, but you're saving thousands in interest and fees. And like I said before, the concept of having everything rolled in and it's just that one payment instead of it being bill on top of bill on top of bill, it's just so much more manageable. Not only does it just take the pressure off of not having to look at so many different numbers from different creditors or companies that you owe, but you've got the number, you've got the goal right there, and you pay off your debt in a fraction of the time because now you aren't just like shoving things to the side and trying to forget about them. If you are feeling this pressure and this stress, this program is definitely for you. Everyone with over $8,000 or more in debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. So if you have decent credit, you're approved. If you have really terrible credit, that's okay, you're approved. And everybody's situation is different, and PDS Debt really wants to cater to that. So they are offering free credit reports to my Sippendales just for completing their free and quick debt assessment. Just head over to pdsdebt.com/Dale. That is pdsdebt.com/Dale. Like I said, I really wish that I had a solution like this. If you are feeling this way, please don't be embarrassed or ashamed. We have all been there, and I promise you it is so possible to get out of. You absolutely can take your financial freedom back. It will feel so good. So if that's something that you want help in doing, head on over to their website today. Once again, www.pdsdebt.com/Dale. Thank you again so much, PDS Debt, for your support on the channel. It really means so much to me. And thank you so much for helping people take back their financial freedom. That in itself is a huge gift. We appreciate ya. All right, it is riddle time. Today's riddle is, I feel like it's going to be a pretty easy one for you guys, but sometimes I got to throw those out there, and it's usually just for me so I can feel smart solving them too. All right, the riddle is, I'm golden in color and sweet as can be, but beware of the danger that's all around me. What am I? I know you guys all know it already. It's so cute though, right? Anyways, all right, grab your drinks, grab your snacks. Oh, snacks. Right now, you guys, I have the greatest snack that I just can't get enough of. Even when I say snack, I start salivating. I'm putting it on my Instagram, so if you're not already following me on Insta, head over there at Cheryl and Dale. Anyways, the snack it's banana with melted peanut butter on it, and then you sprinkle dark chocolate chips, and then you take it up a level by putting chocolate coconut flakes on it. I can't even describe what it tastes like because it's in a caliber all on its own. It kind of reminds me of cookie dough. It kind of reminds me of a banana split. I don't know. I can't get enough of it. So if you want to pause this video and go and make one and then come down and sit and eat it, I won't be mad. All right, today's case is one that I came across recently when I was watching TV and I saw a preview for it for this new show starring Jessica Biel, and it's called Candy, and it was very thriller, suspenseful. I got hooked from the trailer instantly, so good job, Hulu. And then at the end it said it was based on a true story, and I was like, what? So I looked into it, could not believe what I was reading the whole entire time, and then even right at the end, I could have never anticipated the outcome. This is one of those cases where you're like, oh, okay, so there really is not anyone that I can trust out there now. You know, if you thought having trust issues with your spouse was problematic, try your cookie baking church going friends. Today we are heading to Wylie, Texas. The population is about 41,000. I want to make sure that that's accurate today because that is what I was researching, but this was in the 80s. So hold on a second. Hey Siri. Oh, rude. Why do I even do this to myself, you guys? She hates me. Hey, Siri. What is the population of Wylie, Texas?
As of 2020, the population of Wylie was 57,526.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I would say I give up, but we all know apparently I'm a sucker for punishment and just want to feel like a sack of crap every time I talk to her. All right, so Wylie has increased its population a little bit since the story, but for this story, it was around 41,000. It's described as more, suburby than Dallas, less busy. Quaint is the word that I read a lot. Today's story starts on June 13th in 1980. It was actually Friday the 13th, in fact. And Friday the 13th had just been released in theaters on May 9th of that year. So, just over a month before. So I'm pretty sure that year everybody was already really hyper aware of it being Friday the 13th. For the most part, the curse or, the fear of Friday the 13th and something terrible happening doesn't really happen that often. But on this particular day, on this particular Friday the 13th, it was unforgiving to a 30-year-old elementary school teacher, wife, and mother named Betty Gore. What Betty experienced was a real-life horror movie, worse than anything Jason could have done. She was found dead in her home with 41 axe wounds to her body. 41. Betty was born Betty Pomeroy in Kansas to Bob and Bertha Pomeroy. She was the only girl and oldest child. The Pomeroys had 2 sons after Betty was born. Their names were Ronnie and Richard. Betty was described as the most beautiful baby, and when she was 3, that was affirmed when she was voted the most beautiful baby in a local competition. Her personality was very bubbly and fun. In school, she was popular not just for being beautiful and timeless, but also kind. She was in music, she played the clarinet, she did theater, she was the vice president of the school council, a member of the girls' basketball team. She did it all. Betty was a girly girl and liked to be fashionable, but she also didn't mind rolling her sleeves up, getting dirty. When I get rowdy, ever since that song came out, that's all I think of when I hear the word dirty. It's probably been like 20 years. But for Betty, dirty meant, getting in the mud. She knew how to work on the family farm, drove the tractor, she helped bale the hay. Although she liked helping her family out on the farm, her aspirations weren't to, be a farmer or have a farm of her own. She really wanted to be an elementary school teacher for as long as her whole family could remember. After she graduated high school, she was accepted to Southwestern for college. And that's where she went to pursue her dream of getting a teaching degree. While she was there, she met a grad student named Alan Gore. Alan was a TA, teacher's assistant, and Betty was one of his students in freshman math. And even though Betty was a great student and got really good grades, math she really struggled in. Fully relatable girl. If there's something that can give me more anxiety than thinking about being stoned, it's solving a math equation. So Betty asked Alan if he could give her a hand with tutoring after school to improve her math grades. Alan agreed, but he was very professional. He knew Betty was a student. He wasn't going to put any moves on her or anything like that. But the following year, when she was no longer in his class, he continued to tutor her and add a little bit of extracurricular activities of their own. So they started dating. They fell deeply in love. Betty loved his intelligence and his drive, which is something she really needed because she was highly determined, intelligent, and motivated herself. So she couldn't be somebody who wasn't on that level. And Alan saw the same characteristics in her. He thought he was very lucky to have her because she had the same goals and aspirations as he did. So it was a no-brainer to lock each other down. And on January 25th, 1970, they got married. Betty was definitely the wife that Alan dreamed she was going to be. She was attentive, very supportive towards him and his career. She was also good at keeping things very routine. He knew when to expect dinner, when laundry day was. Their week was always pre-planned. Even their future was pretty mapped out with deadlines. They were just living a typical nice young married life. In 1973, she graduated with her teaching degree and got a position as a substitute. So since it wasn't a full-time, she was also supplementing some of that income by selling Avon door to door. Yeah, it was door to door back then. When I was researching this, I just thought about Chelsea Suarez. If you don't watch her, she's over at I Am CC Suarez. She does a lot of commentary content. A lot of it is focused on anti-MLM. And so learning about the Avon made me think of her because I think we've all had one of those experiences where people, or several experiences, where people will just go into your DMs unsolicited and be like, hey girl, do you want to hear about this opportunity? But in the 70s, they didn't have access to the DMs. They were just knocking door to door, which I'm not going to lie is really impressive. I've done sales before and looking at a call sheet made me want to throw up. I can't imagine just going to knock on somebody's door and be like, hello, would you like my perfume? Anyways, that is what Betty was doing. And on their free time, her and Alan joined their local church and they found their community there. At one point, Alan was even the chairman of the council for their ministry. By November of that same year, Betty gets pregnant. They had a daughter that they named Alyssa. But unfortunately, Betty didn't get to enjoy motherhood, I guess like she hoped she would. She was hit with postpartum depression really hard. But in those days, postpartum depression, it's not like it even wasn't really talked about. I think just even diagnosing it was nowhere near where we are now. And so everybody around Betty and Alan just kind of thought she was withdrawing and that she was a little bit stuck up. Even Alan felt like she was a completely different person than who he married. She dealt with this for about a year. It started to take a turn and get a little bit better when she was offered a more permanent teaching position. It kind of gave her purpose, I think, again. She had a career to focus on, and this position was in Wiley, Texas. Alan was also able to get a transfer from his job to Wiley, so it made for a nice, smooth transition. Needless to say, Betty was doing much better. She was much happier than she was the year prior, but she did bring up concerns that she was almost fearful of going through it again. She was scared of getting pregnant. She was really fearful of those emotions and hormones, which that's what she thought was attributing to her, the way she was feeling. It definitely sounded much more than hormones. It was more postpartum depression, but she wasn't being treated like that. The doctors just kind of kept giving her Valium just to numb her down. I don't even think that's a phrase. It really did affect Betty long term though. Even when she was feeling more happy and content in her life, she still had this obsession to be perfect. Once she got a teaching job, she was so fearful of now losing that. She put so much pressure on herself to, have the best class with the best grades. She was really hard on the students though, because if they didn't do that well, she felt like it reflected poorly on her. And I mean, these little nuggets were just in elementary school, so having those expectations on them was a little bit intense sometimes. But I really think she was just misunderstood, misdiagnosed. She felt like Alan was the only one who really understood her. And for the most part, their marriage was really great. One thing that Alan did have a hard time with, though, being married to Betty, was that she really struggled if he went away on a work trip, even if it was for one night. Alan was a computer programmer, so there were a lot of occasions where he was just sent within the state to do work for other companies, and Betty wasn't down with it. She would have kind of like a full-blown meltdown the day that she found out he was even going to be leaving, even if the trip was, a month or two away. I'm not gonna lie, that is a little bit relatable. I think it has more to do with my abandonment issues though. I guess for Betty it was so hard though that there was even one time that she called Alan's boss and she said, you gotta send Alan back home. My anxiety is unmanageable right now. So by 1980, his work trips had definitely dwindled down. They were becoming less and less frequent. And on the times that he did need to go away, they had worked out a pretty solid routine where they were in touch basically the whole time. He would call her when he got to the airport. He'd call her when he landed, after he arrived at the hotel. So on the afternoon of June 13th, Alan was assigned to be in Minnesota for work. When he got to the airport, he called Betty like he usually did, but she didn't answer. He figured she just stepped out or she was busy with the kids, so he got on his flight. When he landed, he tried to call Betty again, and again there was no answer. Just thinking to himself, it's probably just the worst timing apparently, because we just keep missing each other. He heads to the hotel, and then after he checks in, he tries several times throughout the evening, and Betty still isn't answering. At this point, it was concerning to him because he knows how much Betty doesn't want to be alone. So he knows she's gonna be waiting by the phone, wanting to talk to him as much as she can throughout the evening. So he calls his and Betty's friends, Candy and Pat Montgomery, who happen to have their daughter Alicia over at a sleepover, and he just says, "Have you talked with Betty at all today? As she called to check in on our little one?" Candy said she saw Betty earlier on in the day when she had to go and grab Alicia's bathing suit, and she said everything seemed fine. Betty was just sitting at the table. She was sewing something. They chatted briefly. She grabbed the bathing suit, and then she left and headed back to church. She says she's sure everything's okay, but if he wants, she can go over to check. And Alan says, no, it's all good. He was going to call their next door neighbor to just go and give a little knock on the door. He calls the neighbor, and he's at home alone with the kids because his wife is out playing bridge. So he's kind of like, yeah, all right, I'll quickly run over to see if she answers. He runs next door, knocks on the door. There's no answer. He comes back to his house, grabs the phone, and says, sorry, Alan, she didn't answer. So Alan goes for dinner at the hotel with some of his coworkers that also went along on the trip, but he can't eat the whole time. So he excuses himself, goes back up to the room, calls his neighbor one more time, and he says, hey, can you check and see if her car's in the garage? Maybe she just went out somewhere and forgot to tell me. So he runs back, checks the garage. Betty's car is there, goes back to the house, tells Alan on the phone, yeah, the car is there. And now Alan's really freaked out. So he asks him to give him the number for the hospital directory. Not the hotel. Hospital. He calls the hospital to see if either Betty or baby Bethany had been admitted there. There's no records. So he calls his good old neighbor again and he says, can you please go back and this time check all the doors? By this point, the neighbor had called his wife to say, I think you should come home. Something doesn't feel right over here. He was actually a realtor who sold Betty and Alan their house. So he's got this little desk drawer full of keys. So he goes, tries to shuffle through to see if he still has their key. By this point, Alan's feeling pretty restless. He happened to have a pretty good friend who lived quite close to the neighborhood. So he called him, woke him up from his sleep to say, hey, do you mind also going over to the house? I don't think my neighbor's really comfortable with like busting down a door or something. If it needs to, I give you permission to go and do that. So he also runs over, and when he gets there, he sees that there seems to be a light on inside, but there's no movement, and they're pounding on the doors and windows, and no one's coming. For some reason, everybody who kept going to the house was going around like the side and the back door, and no one had gone to the front door to try it out. So they go to the front door and it's unlocked. After all of that, so they let themselves in. They're calling for Betty. No answer. But as they're making their way through the house, all of a sudden they hear this piercing scream. And they realize it's 1-year-old little baby Bethany, and she's in her crib, hysterical. When they get in there, they can tell she had been in there probably the whole entire day. So the neighbor scoops her up and he runs her over to his wife and calls the police because he sees her and he's like, this, whatever is happening here is not gonna turn out good. The other friends of Alan's stay to look around, and they see a light coming from the utility room door. They go to it, they open it up, and they find Betty dead. The scene was gruesome. She was covered in blood. The room was covered in blood. I mean, not to make too many references to Friday the 13th, like a horror movie coming out, but it looked like the scene of a horror movie in there. Their first reaction when they see her is, oh my God, she shot herself. The scene is just, it's too much. They quickly turn around. They know that she's beyond help, and they go to call 911 on the house phone. But in the meantime, just as they're about to call 911, Alan is calling to check to see if everything's going okay. And his friend tells him the baby is okay, but unfortunately it's not looking good for Betty. It looks like she's shot herself. I guess Alan just kind of sat there in silence on the other end, partly because he was really confused trying to put those words together and make sense of it, because they didn't even own a gun. It wasn't until the police arrived and Betty was taken to the medical examiner that they quickly realized it's not a self-inflicted wound. It was an overwhelming amount of blows to her body with an axe. So the detectives process the scene like a crime scene. And like I said, the scene, what happened to Betty, it's just overwhelming. If you want graphic detail and want to read a book, Evidence of Love by Jim Atkinson and John Bloom is very detailed. I think one of the hardest parts to digest was that the medical examiner said out of the 41 injuries to her body, the majority of them were sustained while her heart was still beating, so she was still alive to feel them. As the police are going through this scene, one thing that looked suspicious to them was that it looked like somebody tried to clean up, but I mean not well at all. It was just basically like a cloth was picked up or a towel, and there was just like smears and swirls and wipes everywhere. And it's almost like whoever did this realized how much there was to try to clean, saw that it probably wasn't possible, or they ran out of time because they had to be somewhere. The good thing about this is whoever was cleaning up left a thumbprint behind in Betty's blood. So this thumbprint had to belong to the person that was in the house while she was bleeding. They also found a bloody imprint of what they believe to be a flip-flop sandal, because it had those 3 little, circular attachments on the bottom of it that was outlined in blood on the floor. Then moving through the house, when they get to the bathroom, they see that there's some blood in the shower, and then there's also quite a bit of hair stuck in the drain. So it looked to them like whoever killed Betty decided to just hop in her shower and take a shower after. Something else at the scene that was pretty eerie for investigators, I can imagine, being one of them and walking through and seeing all of this, and they get to the table that had Betty's sewing stuff out, and there's this newspaper that's open up, and it's open up on one of those, movie review sections, and there's blood splattered on the section, and the movie review that it's open to is The Shining. Because not only had Friday the 13th just been released, but so had The Shining on May 23rd of that year.
Here's Johnny.
I guess as the police are taking statements from the neighbors who found Betty, the phone rings again, and again it's Alan trying to figure out what's going on their end. And the police take the call. They update him a little bit on the situation. And although they can't see his expression, his tone and the questions or lack of questions that he's asking or not asking. It sounds suspicious to the police. They say they know that everybody reacts different in these situations and they don't want to, place judgment based on that. Side note, do you ever feel like that phrase is said so much that it's like they want you to feel like they don't pass judgment on your reaction, but really they do, because they do every time? And I mean, in this situation, it's fair because they did look at Alan. Their gut instinct was Alan did it. He killed his wife, didn't have time to clean it up, got on his work trip, and tried to build himself an alibi. Leading their suspicions even further towards Alan was that they found this pot of coffee that was still on when they arrived at the scene, and it appeared that it had been on all day. It was burnt at the bottom and the majority of it had been evaporated. So they assumed that something must have happened first thing in that morning between Betty and Alan before they even, had a chance to have their morning coffee. One thing that didn't fit with the Alan theory, though, was the flip-flop. Not to say that he didn't love a little flip-flop moment every now and then, but this flip-flop print was very small. First glance, it looks like it belongs to a child or a woman with extremely tiny feet. They also have another curveball thrown at them looking away from Alan when somebody calls Betty's home and her brother picks up, and on the other line, the caller says, "I killed her." It startled him so much that he just hung up, but the calls, they kept coming in, and this person would say things like, "If you don't keep the daughter off the streets, she's next." So the police set up a wiretap to see if this person calls again, they can hopefully trace it. In the meantime, a 6-year-old little girl tells her parents that day that Betty was found, she had gone to the Gore house to look for Alicia to try to play with her, but there was no answer. Maybe a child with a missing pair of flip-flops? Her parents called the police because they know any information could be useful information. And the police interview this little girl and they find out that she was there around 10 a.m. She said she rang the doorbell and nobody answered. And it stuck out to her because she knew somebody was home because she could hear Alicia's little baby sister crying in the house, but no one was coming to the door. And she also saw another one of her friend's moms leave the house. They asked her who left the house, and she said it was Jenny's mom, Candy Montgomery. That's not really out of the ordinary. Candy and Betty were friends along with their children. They all clicked the first day they met at church. They hadn't been as close as they once were because Betty had gone through that bout of postpartum depression and she just isolated herself from everybody. But the kids were still really close, and that's who Alicia was staying with the night that Betty was found. Candy was, I think, what you would picture your picturesque housewife, church-going mama. She taught at the Sunday school. She was a member of the choir. First to offer a hand to anybody in her community that needed help. Probably baked the best banana bread on the block. And the kids in her Sunday school loved her because they said she was almost childlike. She would do voices and get really animated when she would tell stories. So they always had fun. Everybody always had fun around Candy. She was born Candace Wheeler, and she was raised in an army household. Her father served, and they moved around quite a bit. One of her favorite places that she got to call home was France. I don't blame her. Some children withdraw a lot in these situations because they don't know how to constantly readjust or make new friends, but Candy did exceptionally well. She was extroverted. She had no problem getting out there and making friends in every new place they moved. And apparently she specifically had no issues making friends with the boys. Even in elementary school, she was described as a flirt. She was also a bit rebellious, kind of a tomboy sometimes. She was described as somebody who was not going to be forgotten in a crowd or looked over in the background. She made a mark and an impression everywhere she went. When she was a teenager, she was a typical teen. She liked to go to the mall, hung out at the fast food restaurants with her friends. She liked to ride around in cars with boys. She clashed a lot with her mom, mostly over not being allowed to wear a lot of makeup or being able to stay out too late. Fully relatable as well. I got the impression that she was kind of maybe a hopeless romantic. Maybe not even like a hopeless romantic, but definitely wanted to be in a relationship. She met her first love when she was 16, and it was a moment she was counting down the minutes for growing up. I mean, if she's described as a flirt and boy crazy in elementary, you can only imagine those hormones in high school. Like the majority of high school relationships, though, it didn't last too long, and her family moved to El Paso. Over the next year or so, she decided she really wanted to be a mom now. It wasn't so much focusing on being a wife or having a relationship. She just wanted a roster of children. So now when she was dating people, it was for a long-term commitment and, the person that could get her to her baby goal. She ended up finding it by surprise in a young man named Pat Montgomery. She was working at a furniture factory with Pat's mom, actually, and it was Pat's mom who said, I think you guys would be a really good fit together. So she's the one who arranged the date. On paper, Pat definitely ticked all the boxes for Candy. He was a young, brilliant electrical engineer that worked for Texas Instruments. They're the company that makes that calculator that you have to pay $1 billion for in high school. And to this day, I've never, ever needed to use it. Probably why I get anxiety thinking about math. I guess on their first date, though, they weren't really feeling each other. Pat wasn't a really good conversationalist, and he wasn't really impressed with Candy, and so he wasn't trying to make conversation, and so Candy thought he was pretty dull. For their date, they just went to dinner, and then they went to go see the movie Airplane, so they didn't really need to talk too much because they're just sitting in a movie. I guess at the end of the date, they both, in their mind, were like, okay, that's over. But Pat instinctively says, oh, well, that was fun. We should do it again sometime just to be polite. And then Candy surprises herself by enthusiastically saying, yeah, we should. So they end up going out the next day. But then after that, neither of them commit to another date. And they just both assumed that was going to be it. They'd never see each other again. Not long after that, though, Pat's uncle passed away, and he was very close with him. He was more like a father to him than his own father. And for some reason, he called Candy for comfort and wanted to reach out to her. So they decide to go out, not necessarily on a date, but just to distract him. And while they did this, Candy saw this other side to him. He was more emotional, vulnerable, and she thought those are really great qualities that she would want in a partner. Pat also saw this different side of Candy where she was a shoulder to cry on and brought him comfort. And I guess, saw a wife and a mother material in her as well. And so 2 months after this first date that they never thought they'd see each other after, they got engaged. Quickly after getting engaged, they got married. And then they had 2 children. They had Jenny in 1972 and Ian in 1974. I guess Pat's routine was he liked to work a lot in the evenings where there wasn't a lot of other people at the site, so he could have a computer to himself, not have to deal with coworkers. So Candy got all of her socializing in the evening while he did that. She found the majority of her friends at church, which is where she met Betty. So it's natural police want to talk to her. They want to find out A, if this little girl was right and it was her that she saw leaving the house. And B, if it was, what was Betty's mood like? Was she fearful of anything? Did she bring anything up? Did she see Alan while she was there? Candy said that morning she arrived at church at around 9 a.m. She had her children as well as Betty and Alan's daughter who had just spent the night prior with them. And the kids really wanted to have another sleepover, back to back. So she brought them all to church because she was running a vacation Bible school. Around 9:45, she said she headed to the Gore household because she needed to grab Alyssa's swimsuit because she had swimsuit practice after church, and now that she was going to take her for the night, she would take her to the class. She said the kids were really jazzed about the evening because after dinner, they were going to go to The Empire Strikes Back.
I love you.
I know.
1980 really just had all the movies, apparently. Candy said when she got to the house, Betty was sewing. They had a brief exchange, caught up a little bit because it had been quite a while since they saw each other. And then Candy used the washroom, grabbed the swimsuit, and then left. She said that the whole time she was there was probably less than 15 minutes. From there, Candy said she stopped at Target to grab a Father's Day card for her husband and then went back to church, arriving around 11-ish. Because she's being interviewed and she was in the house, the police ask if they can take her fingerprints. She's cooperative. She says, yes, obviously you're gonna see my fingerprints in the house because I was there. So after that, Candy's good to go. Meanwhile, one of those taunting calls that the Gores kept getting at their household comes through again. This time, Betty's able to keep the caller on the line long enough to trace the call. And when the police go to the address, it's a halfway house that has a recently released patient from a psych ward, and this was the individual that was making the calls. I guess this patient had heard about the case, managed to track down the Gore's house number, and was just enjoying trying to take credit for the crime. But when it actually came down to it, this wasn't the person that killed Betty. They knew nothing about the house, nothing about what Betty was wearing, just nothing really about the crime actually in general. By this point, it had been about 3 days since Betty was found, and so police sit down with Alan again and they ask him some more questions because the investigation is starting to get to a standstill. Stand still. This time, he admits that him and Betty had a little bit of an argument before he went on his trip. He said the argument was over Betty thinking that she might be pregnant again, and she was getting really worked up over it, and he was just kind of trying to reassure her that everything was going to be okay. But I'm sure a lot of women can relate to this. It's like when you're really upset about something and then someone tells you like, calm down, it's going to be okay. You don't calm down because you don't think it's going to be okay. She just really didn't want to go through all of the emotions again. She didn't want to put her marriage at risk. She was finally starting to feel like they had gotten to a place in their relationship and she was building back her relationships with friends again. She just didn't want to risk it. Things had gotten so strained between her and Alan that they had recently just finished a marriage counseling course that was put on by their church called Marriage Encounter. It was like this weekend getaway that they did, and luckily it did wonders for them. They got to reconnect, and they even had planned this Europe vacation that they were going to go on without the kids, and they were actually scheduled to leave less than a week before Betty was found. Alan said by the time he left, everything had been smoothed over. He was able to calm her down by just saying, you know, whatever life has to throw at us, we're going to deal with it. Try to just focus on this vacation that we're going to have coming up. So he said she was able to shift her focus back to that. And she told him, okay, I'm going to distract myself by sewing some outfits for my trip while you're gone. So the police leave. They've got this little added argument to add to their information. But the next morning, Alan calls and he's got some more information to add. He says he has something that he wants to get off his chest. He doesn't believe that it has any connection to the case, but it's just eating him up inside and he needs to provide the police with all the information that he can. He said it had been about 1.5 years before Betty's murder, but he had been having an affair with one of Betty's friends who was a member of the church. This friend was a friend they already had written down. It was Candy Montgomery. Alan said this affair came to fruition about 1.5 years earlier during a volleyball game at the church. The two of them were playing on the same team, and I guess they were going for the ball at the same time, and they crashed into each other. And as they were consoling one another, sparks flew. Apparently after the game, she goes to the parking lot and Alan's in his car and she just hops in the passenger side and says, I've been thinking about you a lot and I don't know if you should do anything about it, but I just had to tell you. And then she hops out of the car. Alan initially didn't really know what to do with the information. He didn't like the idea of, having an affair with somebody. But things were really rocky with Betty at the time. And when it came to anything romantic between the two of them, he found that things were really mechanical because this is when they were trying for a baby. So everything was like pre-planned, strictly baby-making purpose, love-making, that was it. I guess at the next volleyball game, he and Candy spoke about it again, but he was like, I'm really flattered, but I couldn't do anything. But after a few weeks, Alan is still thinking about it, and he eventually comes to the conclusion that he just wants to talk to Candy about, possibly what the arrangement could be and how they could go about it without hurting their spouse. So they meet up for lunch. It's actually Candy's birthday, and they decide that they're going to go forward with this affair, but the condition is that they can't catch feelings. And if anybody is, it's off. So they both agree. But they leave the lunch without doing anything. They still wanted to sleep on the decision, make sure that they're making the right decision. Just feel like I have to put this out there. There's just like no right decision when it comes to affair. Just just end the relationship if you don't want to be with your spouse. I guess for about a month, they talk on the phone every single day, and they're going over the pros and cons of having this affair. They're going over the strategies of how it's going to play out, where they're going to meet up, what they would do to avoid getting caught. And then finally, they set a date. Like, the date is going to be this day of the start of our affair. And they choose December 12th, 1978. And they're going to meet at the Continental Inn on Alan's lunch hour. I'm just gonna say, for somebody who felt like his home life was too mechanical and structured, this arrangement seems no different to me. I guess a few months in, Candy tried to call things off because she felt like she was getting a little bit attached. And by this point, Alan was kind of enjoying himself, and he thought, oh, like, let's bend the rules a little bit. Let's just let it run its course. Try not to let those feelings get stronger. Let's just kind of keep doing what we're doing physically and don't pay too much attention to the emotion. And during the affair, this is when Betty got pregnant with their youngest, baby Bethany. I don't know why I keep calling her baby Bethany. That wasn't in the book or anything, like a pet name for her. I just keep calling her baby Bethany. Rolls off the tongue. So after Bethany was born, it was then Alan who told Candy, I think everything needs to be put on hold. I want to be there for Betty, help her with the baby, be there for the baby. And apparently Candy said, yeah, sure, no problem. She was cool with that. She was so cool with it, in fact, that she actually threw Betty her baby shower. I told you at the beginning, you can trust no one. So after Bethany was born, Alan and Candy, they started up their affair again. But it did end up coming to an end after Betty confronted Alan. She didn't confront him about having an affair, but she could feel him emotionally pulling away from her. And she just straight up said that she felt like he didn't love her anymore. This was not what Alan wanted. He didn't want to hurt Betty. So he goes to Candy and he says that they just have to end it there. I guess initially she wasn't happy this time though. She reminded him, the time she tried to end things, and he said, let it run its course. So she was like, okay, well, let's just keep letting this run its course. But ultimately she does accept him ending it, and then she actually moves on to have an affair with another little fellow. So it kind of distracted her. So to start fresh and show Betty that Alan is committed and he loves her and wants to work on things, that's when they register to do this weekend retreat through the church called Marriage Encounters. I guess from the experience, Alan really got to learn a lot about Betty, just how she was dealing with emotions and where her distance was coming from, and that it had nothing to do with him. We know it had to do with her being misdiagnosed of having postpartum depression, but nobody knew where that was coming from. So as she's able to communicate with him and articulate to him that she wants to be with him and she does love him, she just doesn't know how to deal with feeling, so low, and that she was just struggling mentally and needed support. It all made sense to him, and he left feeling a much bigger appreciation for her, for everything that she had been going through, and then still wanting, to be with him. It's almost like they re-fell in love again, and they even finished up the weekend by renewing their vows. When Betty was killed, Alan said that the affair had already been over for about 7 months, and he truly didn't believe that had anything to do with what happened to Betty, but he just needed to get it out there, get it off of his chest, and let them know. Obviously, after this information, things, don't look really good for Alan, but he wanted to prove that he had nothing to do with what happened to Betty, and he wanted to move the suspicion off of him and onto the person who did it. So he asks them to give him a polygraph, and they do, and he aced it. Now, although they had already spoken to Candy, they didn't have this whole affair tidbit, so they go back to her to talk to her about that. Candy admits to having the affair with Alan, but says there was no hard feelings and she had nothing to do with Betty's murder. They ask her to take a polygraph since Alan offered, but she says no. Again, that's not enough to accuse somebody or charge her with murder, so she's allowed to leave. All of this is happening pretty fast. It's been about 4 days since Betty was found, and they hadn't tested some of the prints that had been collected from the scene yet. So they pulled Candy's fingerprint that she gave in her first interview, and they test it against the one that was found in the house, and what do you know, it matches. Not only that, but that tiny little flip-flop at the scene, it was a size 5. And that was Candy Montgomery's shoe size. I thought I had a small feet. I'm 6'1.5". 5 is tiny. They confront Candy. They said that looking at the scene, they didn't believe she went there to carry on an attack. They believe when she went there to pick up the bathing suit, something happened between her and Betty, and it was just in the moment. Obviously, where they first go is that maybe Betty picked up on this affair between Candy and Alan and confronted Candy about it. It takes a bit of time, but on June 27th, there is an arrest warrant issued for Candy, and she is arrested for the murder of Betty Gore. I guess at the jail while she's being booked and photographed, there's just bruises all over her body. So the suspicion that some fight ensued between the two of them was pretty clear because she was black and blue. And she also had this huge gash on her toe. It sounds like the town was quite chaotic. It's like if they thought a murder happening in their town was shocking, when they find out it's Candy, this picture perfect church going choir singing mama, they're in disbelief. I think it was kind of like a soap opera where everybody was waiting to see what was going to happen at the trial. And on the first day of the trial, the defense drops this bomb and they say Candy Montgomery did kill Betty Gore, but it was in self-defense. Candy takes the stand in the trial to tell her side of the story. And her version of events is that when she went to pick up the bathing suit from Betty, she did confront Candy about the affair. I guess it caught Candy off guard because she was just anticipating having this normal conversation with Betty. It was the furthest thing from her mind. She said seconds before Betty was talking to her about giving Alyssa peppermints at the swimming lesson if she put her face in water, because that's how she enticed her to get her face wet because she didn't like to do that. So her mind is like swimming lessons, all of a sudden like boom, affair. Candy said she didn't even try to deny it or come up with an excuse. She just said, yes, they had an affair, but it had been over for almost a year. She said Betty just kind of calmly excused herself, walked into the utility room, and she comes back and she's just like holding an axe in her hand and very matter-of-factly says to Candy, you can't have him. I want you to stay away from him. And Candy's like, yeah, there's no problem. It's long over. It will never happen again. I guess Betty placed the axe down and kind of tried to compose herself and gather Alyssa's things for Candy. Told her if it wasn't, for her already telling her that she could have a sleepover and go to this movie, she didn't want her child staying with her, but she didn't want to let her down. So they kind of, had a little bit of an exchange. And I guess Candy put her hand out to touch Betty to just say, I'm so sorry. And this allegedly put Betty into a rage. Candy said she swung her arm around, she pushed her to the ground, she grabbed the axe, and she just started screaming at her that she needed to stay away from Alan and she could never have him. Candy said she pulled the axe back behind her head and she knew at that moment she needed to get up and she had no choice but to kill her to save herself. She said they screamed at each other back and forth, they struggled with the axe for quite a bit. During the struggle, at one point, the axe fell and bounced and cut Candy on the toe, and that's what gave her that big gash. She said multiple times she tried to run out of the utility room, but Betty blocked her. At one point, while they were struggling, Candy got control over the axe. She said she knocked Betty down and tried to run out, but Betty came after her and dragged her back in. They struggle again, and Candy gets control over the axe again. And she said at this point she just lost control and she just kept hitting Betty. Allegedly, Candy said even with these axe injuries to Betty, she still was trying to keep Candy in the room every time that Candy was trying to run out. Candy said the whole thing was chaotic. They're slipping in blood, going back and forth for control over this axe. And it ends with Candy getting control of it again and hitting Betty until she stopped. The prosecution is like, okay, well, 41 injuries from an axe to someone is not self-defense. It's overkill. So to try to explain that, the defense brings in a psychiatrist who had been treating Candy since her arrest. This psychiatrist had used hypnosis to get Candy to walk him through the events that happened. And he said that during this attack that happened between her and Betty, a suppressed memory came forward that Candy had from childhood where she had been playing outside with a kid in her neighborhood and she had smashed this glass jar on the ground and a piece of it had come up and it cut her in the middle of her forehead. and it caused her to bleed quite heavily. And naturally, being a child, she sees this blood and she just starts screaming. She's hysterical. No one can calm her down. They take her to the hospital, and by the time they get there, she's just inconsolable. It's like past the point of even hysterics. And her mother allegedly got up in her face and aggressively told her to shh because she was embarrassed of her crying so loud and didn't want her to disrupt anybody around her. According to Candy, while she was under hypnosis, she says that during this argument with Betty also got in her face and did the same aggressive shh, and it unlocked something in her and she completely lost control. She says the reason that she hit her so many times was because she kept trying to fight back. She also says that she doesn't even know how long she was in a daze from. She just kind of almost had an out-of-body experience of her just walking through the house, walking to the shower, walking in the shower with all of her clothes on still, and just rinsing the blood off. She admits to trying to clean up the utility room with some towels, but it was just too much for her to tackle and she needed to get back to the church, so she just stopped. And she said for the next couple days, she just kept living like she was in a movie and couldn't grasp what she had done. After her testimony, the defense rested. The jury went into deliberation and they only deliberated for 4 hours. When they come back, they just blast the town with another shock. They find Candy Montgomery not guilty. I guess the courtroom was shooketh. They can't believe it. It's loud. Everybody's like, what the heck is going on? Allegedly, 3 of the 12 jurors were personal friends with Candy. The foreman of the jury was allegedly Candy's defense lawyer's daughter's soccer coach. So Candy's defense lawyer, his daughter, the foreman of the jury, was her soccer coach. So there's a lot of people who feel like that wasn't a fair trial. And to this day, a lot of people are still affected because although the case is closed, it doesn't really feel that way. You know, was Candy telling the truth? How does somebody end up there? 2 non-confrontational gal pals from church just end up being like the subjects of this gruesome true crime case. You know, it's almost like you want a different explanation. I'm unable to process Betty being this, elementary school teacher, mother of 2, loving wife to just grab this axe and be super intimidating. But in the same breath, I can feel like, okay, well, maybe that could happen. She had been through so much with postpartum. She had rifts in her relationships. And if she did have this lingering suspicion that something had gone on between Candy and Alan and it was just like festering and getting bigger and bigger, you can only hold on to that for so long before you just snap. I'm sure it was probably just a flood of emotions going on between the 2 of them because at one time they had been really close. They had been friends at church. Their kids had been super close. And then they kind of went through this period where there was that, separation of the friendship and this like underlying resentment, and they turned into almost like frenemies. It's hard to explain. I don't know why. It just feels so unfinished. I can't imagine how Betty's loved ones feel. You'll have to let me know if you feel the same of this just being kind of in limbo, even though it's over. Doesn't feel over. Is it over? It's over. I guess Candy Montgomery is now using her maiden name of Candace Wheeler, and she is working as a therapist in Georgia, which is, makes me feel even, more unsure of how to process this all. But that is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. I know a lot of you are missing Clout Baby, and I don't really talk about my Instagram too much on YouTube, but if you're not following me on Instagram already, head on over there. There's lots of Clout Baby over there. And it's not like I'm keeping her from you guys or anything. It's just that usually my husband will go and do something with the kids while I film, so it's not like overly chaotic. I don't know if you could tell, but halfway through filming, they came home, and when Reverie can hear my voice, she just goes ballistic. So it's just easier that way. So if you're needing a little fix until the next time she's in a video, head on over to Instagram and catch up there. All right, the answer to the riddle. Actually, you know what? I'll give you guys a little treat today, okay? Oh, who's that? Who's that? Okay, you kind of have a little bit of a runny nose. Say hi. Say hi, everybody. Let's read the riddle, okay? All right. The riddle was, I'm golden in color and sweet as can be, but beware of the danger that's all around me. What am I? What is it? What do you think? Say honey, honey, honey. All right, I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.